Oh, welcome from the deep. I am Mike the Finder, and this is yet another episode of
The Graveyard Shift.
Today we're going to be talking about 2022's Hocus Pocus 2. I have a lot of history with the original. It's one of my all-time favorite Halloween kids movies. I grew up watching it, so this is one of those movies I've been putting off watching for a few days, and that's because I knew I was going to have a lot of thoughts about it. And I do. If you watch the original growing up, you will probably fall into one of two camps. I'm really excited about this sequel, or oh God, please don't fuck up my childhood. I am definitely in one of those. Hocus Pocus 2 from 2022. This is directed by Anne Fletcher, and it is obviously the sequel to the 1993 movie. If you grew up watching this, you probably fall into one of these camps, right? You're super excited to have this movie made so you can relive some of that from your childhood. Or the other camp, are they gonna ruin the legacy of one of my favorite movies? When I sat down to watch this, I had a lot of doubts about what this movie could bring to the table. I had heard from a lot of people that they really liked it, but I've also heard from several people, including Brett,
I hated it.
that he hated it.
I hated it.
Brett and I generally have the same opinions on stuff, and so I was going into this movie under the assumption that I was going to dislike this a lot. And I have to say, it's definitely different than what I was expecting it to be. The original felt very, I don't think it was a Disney Channel movie, but it felt very Disney Channel movie-esque. And by that I mean Halloween Town, Brink, Johnny Tsunami, any of that kind of stuff. It felt very campy and sort of lighthearted and stuff like that. And in the second one, right off the bat, it's far more cinematic and dramatic and dark.
Take the girl!
What? No, and not take my sisters! No!
And it created a completely different tone than what I was expecting to get out of this. I knew it was going to be hard for them to sort of capture the same tone from 1993. I was worried that it was going to be too polished and too clean and too neon, like kind of everything else is. I was actually surprised on how much they really leaned into the witch, magic, seance, coven thing. I really thought Disney would say, no. You can't do that kind of stuff. This was made in the 90s. This was a long time ago. People don't allow that kind of stuff in kids' stuff anymore generally, and I was actually super impressed by that. I was really expecting them to nerf it down as much as possible, and that's not what happened. The cinematography is fantastic in it, and it sells it in a really good way, but it's not over the top like a lot of other stuff is. The lighting is fantastic. All of the ambient lighting and the atmosphere that they're able to create is amazing. You can really kind of tell that they had a higher budget on this movie, and you can really see where that money went just by looking at it. I would imagine it took a lot of money to get all three of the original Sanderson sisters back on screen as them. Sarah Jessica Parker has come a long way since she did the original movie, so I can't imagine it was cheap to get all of them in the same room. The very first scene got me really worried, which is too bad because the first scene is really going to set the tone of the rest of the movie, right? The casting for the Sanderson sisters as kids is pretty good as far as how they look. Their acting maybe isn't the greatest. I personally don't feel like I needed more backstory. I think they were good characters as it was. It's one of the reasons everybody remembers this so fondly. Now, by the end of this first scene, I'm thinking, wow, this is shot much better than the original is. It's lit much better. You can tell that the people that made this really know what they're doing as far as pointing a camera and lighting, and it looks beautiful. But I would imagine now when you watch the first one and the second one butted up against to each other, it's just off balance a little bit. And I feel like they maybe could have matched the tone of the look and style of the original movie in this a little bit more. Then again, this is aimed at people my age who really grew up on this, who want to show this to their kids and stuff. And that's kind of why this movie is so strange, because they're trying to appeal to two different people at once. And so it kind of almost feels like they don't know who this is for. It's definitely fan service, but it doesn't feel pandering to me, which is surprising because that is exactly how it felt before I watched it. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely stuff in here where I rolled my eyes almost out of my head. Honestly, none of it feels in the way of the plot or the story that they're trying to tell, other than the Walgreens ad placements. I cannot stand when movies do this. It immediately pulls me out. It reminded me heavily of when in Ghostbusters they go to Walmart, which is too bad because it was right after the sisters appear. I was just starting to think, oh, okay, maybe this is about to head in a direction that I really like, and then they go to Walgreens. I was this close to just turning it off and just being like,
Nope.
It's terrible. I understand why it's there. This is how you pay for movies, especially when they're going straight to streaming services and stuff like that. This is part of the reason Brett and I are always complaining about physical media and theaters dying, because this is the kind of bullshit that you get streaming only. Now, I'm sure they're putting this out on physical media. I'm sure that it is. But let's face it, 99% of the people that are going to watch this are going to watch it on Disney Plus. This is the kind of stuff that we're talking about, where you have to have Walgreens ads and Walmart ads in movies in order to pay for them. I'm glad these movies are being made, but at the same time, it just takes all of the artistic credit out of the medium when done this way. Moving on. There's some really lazy writing moments in here. There's also stuff where it feels like they just don't trust the audience to get it, so they have to have a character just straight say it, and that is a pet peeve of mine. There's another moment where they just straight explain the first movie to you out loud.
Coven that ever lived.
The sister that is a virgin should light the black flame candle on All Hallows Eve. The full moon in the sky.
And I get that it's to catch people up, but it's also one of those moments that pulled me out of it. And there's just little moments like that sort of peppered throughout this whole thing where it just kind of pulls you out of it and goes, huh? Huh?
Loyalty to the brand.
Despite all of the little things and all the little problems that I have, the characters are genuinely good. I think the main three girls, it's actually pretty cool because they're very subtly dressed and have the same sort of hair as the Sanderson sisters. And so it's sort of planted as a little tiny seed throughout the movie. And it's just subtle enough to really drive the point home that these girls are probably going to take over for the Sanderson sisters. But it's also not quite subtle enough. And so I was able to sort of figure out the plot of this movie about 25 minutes in, just sort of guessed at what was going to happen. And I was right. I don't know. On one hand, this is for kids. On the other hand, this is aimed at people like me who grew up with this movie. So I'm not sure it's the greatest thing in the world that I was able to sort of guess the plot. But this is just part of the whole requel, sequel, reboot, reimagining thing that has been happening in Hollywood for several years now, right? And I'm personally kind of over it. This one I couldn't stay away from though, because it was just so tempting, and Disney knew that. The Sanderson sisters hold up in modern day, and they're great, and the banter between all of them is fantastic. I think the new kids are fantastic too. I think if they make a sequel to this movie, they would do great as the grown-ups or whatever they're gonna do with the sequel, because I do think it's that strong until you get to the very final post-credits scene. Now you're either saying yeah, or you're saying what? Final credits scene. Nobody I've talked to actually sat through the credits and watched it, because Disney Plus credits are 40 minutes. I just happened to be setting all of this stuff up after I watched it and it was playing in the background, and so I saw the post-credit ending and it turned everything around for me as far as really loving the ending. From what I heard, a lot of people really hated the ending, but when you think about it, this is kind of the same way the first one ended. The post-credit scene is basically saying there's another candle, they could do this again, and what that leads me to believe is that we're gonna get a Hocus Pocus 3 somewhere down the line. Maybe the cycle continues. We shall see. I'm really hoping that's not the case, because frankly, I felt a good deal of closure is a weird word to use, but I thought that there was a lot of closure to the Sanderson sisters thing in this movie. And then it was a good way to end this whole thing, because that's something you don't see in all these reboots and requels and sequels and all this stuff. By the end of the movie, when the credits did hit, I was thinking, wow, they actually are moving on from this. And so I'm hoping that post-credit scene is not telling me that we're gonna do this again in a year. I did not like it, and it undid all of the goodness that was in the ending for me. I don't know how to feel about it. Bette Midler as Winifred in this is fantastic. She was great in the first one. She's great in this. She plays that role perfectly. She knows exactly how to play that role. It felt awesome to see her on screen again, as well as Sarah Jessica Parker, who plays Sarah in this. That's creative. Kathy Najimy, I'm horrible with names. All three of them do a fantastic job, and it gave me a huge smile on my face whenever I saw them come on screen for the first time. It drove up all those feelings of nostalgia that Disney is clearly after with this movie, and it made me smile. And for that, I will admit, I like this more because I liked the original when I was a kid. But without the context of the original movie and loving it when I was a kid and watching it over and over and over, I'm not sure I would have felt that same way when they first came on screen. But for me, this movie works a little bit better, I think, than it probably would somebody who hasn't had that same experience. You know, I like this more than I probably should have. I was expecting to really, really, really hate it. All things considered, I think it's pretty good. And honestly, it's not that bad. I wanted to hate this, but I didn't. That was a huge surprise for me. I think despite the product placement stuff, there is actually a pretty good movie in here. There's minor nitpicks that I can make here or there, but at the end of the day, this is a kid's movie, and it's not necessarily supposed to be a cinematic masterpiece, despite how they filmed it and lit it. I hated this much less than I thought I was going to, and so for me, this is going to be a 6 out of 10. I don't typically give sequels and stuff like that such a high rating, but on this one, I feel okay with it. It's a little above average for something that I really went into with zero expectations. And that's not something you're gonna hear me say about a lot of sequels and stuff like that. But you tell me, what did you think of this movie? Am I completely off base here? I thought it was not bad. So let me know down in the comments how you feel. If you like this, make sure you hit the like button. If you really liked it, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We review movies and TV shows and stuff like that all the time. We also do a few watch-alongs here and there. We just have a good time talking about movies on this channel. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you next time from the deep. Bye-bye.